Well, hello again, Liberty lovers. Welcome to another exciting interview on Good Morning Liberty. My name is Josh Martins, and joining me once again is James Harrigan. Now, James is the co host of the Words and Numbers podcast, and about a year ago, he and Ant had a discussion on their podcast that I found very interesting and quite uncomfortably challenging to some of my beliefs. And so I wanted to have him on to discuss it because it's something that I have thought about a lot in the last year and just thought it was something very, very worth going through. So, James, welcome back to the show.
Good to be here, Josh.
Yeah. So, on your podcast, episode number 412, you talked about what we owe each other. And I found this conversation interesting. I found it challenging because you guys went into it and talked about why taxation actually is necessary in society. And I wanted to talk about this because I've thought about it a lot, and it actually, I didn't disagree with you guys on a lot of things there because I'm more of a minarchist, but it called into question a lot of my libertarian beliefs of taxation being theft. Now, I do want to say that I still fully believe that taxation is theft just by its very definition, that if they're taking the fruits of your labor by force, it is theft. But the argument that you guys made, I think, was very compelling in a moral sense. So I guess I wanted to kind of give you a chance to recap the conversation a little bit and talk about, like, what do we owe each other in society?
Well, let me start by asking you, Josh, a simple question. Are you a constitutionalist?
Yes, I would say that I follow the Constitution to a T because
we've got a pretty good one, right?
Yeah, it lays out libertarian values very well. Yeah.
I think so too. But there are any number of things in the Constitution that require us to do things. And you can go for the cheap, easy answer. We have to, or Congress can, build post offices and post roads. Well, that actually seems to be quite an undertaking in 1787. That's going to cost some money, isn't it?
Yeah.
Where's that money going to come from? And we can go right down the list of the basics. We need courts of law. Well, that means you have to have judges. Who's going to pay them? You need buildings. Who's going to build them? Who's going to pay for those? Congress has to meet. Where are they going to do that? In another building that we built to the purpose. Surely we'll have to pay them too. And on and on and on. You see where this sort of thing goes. Now, I'm making the minarchist case here. This is not the maximal state, not by a long shot. And until about 1910-ish or so, the United States spent 2.5% to 4% per capita GDP on the cost of government. Now, from the dawn of the progressive era until yesterday, that's gone up in a damn near straight line to about 40%. So, all right. Now, clearly, up at 40%, you and I are going to be very much on the same page. Very, very much. But down at 2.5% to 4%, I would call that, for lack of a better term, the cost of doing business. And when you live together in a place, there will be a cost of doing business. And I'm going to happily tell you that when we did this episode, the hate mail that we got was phenomenal. I mean, it was just phenomenal.
I believe
because, what do we owe each other? The answer that many of the people who sent said mail was nothing. Really? We don't owe each other anything? That doesn't seem to be the humane answer at all.
Yeah, and so this is part of the challenge that I had listening to it. So obviously, I believe that taxation is theft by principle and by morals. So you cannot, if we have self-ownership, then someone else cannot have a moral claim on the fruits of my labor. That's just a simple, solid principle. At the same time, if we are going to live in a civilized society, you have to have some kind of apparatus to take care of disputes, especially when there is a dispute of private property, right? If me and my
Mhm.
neighbor have a dispute over something, we have to have somebody that's able to work through that, because the alternative to that is a bloody mess, and we don't want that, right? That's how you live in a civilized society, and somehow you have to pay for those things, right? We've talked a lot about different ways to do it. There's theories in libertarian beliefs on voluntarism and contract law, all this kind of different stuff. But to me, the more I think about this over and over again, it's a lot like the utopian idea that socialists have. Like, you can just put all these rules in place, and even though they defy the human nature, right, of every person, everything will work out swimmingly because you just have these rules and everybody will just do what they're supposed to do. In reality, that doesn't really work that way, right? So when I listened to it, I found it challenging because I found my principles kind of at conflict. I understood that it is theft. There's, by definition, there's no other way to frame any kind of forced compensation of your fruits of your labor. But maybe it's at best a necessary evil to live in a society that then protects you of your private property, so we don't descend into the kind of chaos and anarchy that you don't want to live in, right?
It's interesting, right? Because Thomas Paine, one of the great revolutionaries, referred to government as a necessary evil, but it's a necessary evil, and people tend to forget the qualifier. Um, it's interesting when you dig deep into political theory, political philosophy, you find that throughout the Enlightenment, you've got characters like Hobbes, Locke, even Montesquieu in the Persian Letters. They offer state of nature theory as an explanation of how a legitimate state comes to be. And it's always consent, right? That people gather together and they consent to a government. And for all the various differences that one will have with the other, that's close enough for our purposes here today. Okay, that's great. What about every single person who is born after that? There's literally no way that consent can be an ongoing feature in an expressed sort of way, right? Jefferson said that we should have a constitutional convention every 20 years. The hell we should. God, what a disaster that would be. Once things are working, it's a crazy person who wants to meddle with them too much, right? Because the odds of things working, minimal at best, right from the start. So, okay, things are working pretty well. We have this thing, ongoing representation. I'm never going to make the case that it's particularly good, but we have it better here than most people have it in most other places. All right, what are we supposed to do? Right where the rubber meets the road. I happen to agree with you in theory, I think, and in practice mostly, that anytime you put a gun to a man's head and take his money, which is what taxation functionally does, you're dealing with an act of theft. Okay. I'm also of a mind that there is a cost of doing business. And that's the part that all my libertarian friends ceaselessly forget to consider,
Right.
right? They get lost in this kind of abstraction in their minds. And I think you're right to point to the socialists, right? Because they always say the same dopey nonsense. This time it'll work. Why the hell would you think that? It's literally never worked. And this time we'll tinker with those sliders of society just so, and we'll get all the settings just right. And then human nature will be magically overcome. Human nature will never be overcome, ever.
Right. And I guess the human nature is what makes the liberal society, the libertarian ideas, the ideas of individual freedom. It's what makes it work so well, is because it allows human nature to explore their own ambitions, individuals to explore their own ambitions and better their own lives, which plays right into human nature, right? But when
Hmm.
you go to a certain point where you're turning against it, right, where you have those same ambitions that then start to take advantage of other people's private property, you have to have some kind of a stopgap there. You have to have something that puts a roadblock that says, this is too far, right? You can have the theory. We always say the theory is I have the right to swing my fist as far and as hard as I want, but that right ends the second it hits your face. But if I don't, if I, I decide I don't care if I'm hitting your face, how do you then, overcome that, right? This is where a lot of people say libertarian philosophy will always fall into anarchy and lawlessness. And I don't agree with them on that as long as there are those kind of roadblocks. And that was where I kind of listening to your guys' episode. While I didn't agree with all of it, I didn't when Ant started to talk about how it was how did he word it that it became it became against your property rights to not pay your taxes. That I couldn't go there, but the stopgap idea I really did I did appreciate because it then puts that break there. It says you have to stay within these bounds, and we have this body that's going to keep us all and protect our private property. And if government has any role whatsoever, it's only that, right? It's just to protect your private property from other people.
Look, Jefferson said it best: government exists to secure your rights. Period. That's what government is for. If it's gone beyond that, it's gone too far, and you should alter or abolish it. All of this language comes directly from the Declaration of Independence, right? So he's on top of this nonsense. Why is it that so many of us now can't be? And that's the kind of the vexing question that we're left with. People want such purity in their outcomes that they utterly fail to realize that humanity is an impure mess, all wanting completely different things. And in the end, you're going to need some form of monopoly of force, i.e., the state, to adjudicate problems. If nothing else, and I'm not even going to go so far as to say, and that's all we should do. There are lots of other things the state should do. But if nothing else, it must do that much. And the anarchists seem to think that this is going to happen by some form of voodoo, the same way that the socialists think that everybody's going to keep eating under a socialist regime. Neither of those things is ever going to happen.
Well, they do have some theories, and I do want to go through some of them. And like I said, I'm not an anarchist. I'm a minarchist. But they talk about you guys talked about through some of these alternatives. You talk about having an adjudicator that's both private parties go to the adjudicator. And in a lot of ways, this works really well, but it doesn't always work. You guys brought that up, and I thought that was a really good point. So I want to go through some of the alternatives that they bring up as to ideas as to how we could get around not having a state, and just kind of walk through why those wouldn't work in your opinion. So let's start with
Sure.
that adjudicator, the private adjudicator.
Yeah. Yeah. Look, we have this, and we it's called alternative dispute resolution, whereas parties to a case sign off and agree that they're just going to opt out of the legal system and do whatever this third party tells them to do. And that's great as long as there's a legal system, right? Because who's going to enforce it when one party says, well, that's a bullshit answer. I don't like that. We're not doing that.
Right.
Now you got the same problem you had before. And this is always going to be the problem, right? This is ultimately why the state must exert force. You can't get around it. Now, I'm going to almost always make the case, dare I say, always make the case that the state exerts far too much force. But that's what monopolists do. And the state has a monopoly on the use of force. Expect it to go too far. Right. This is really an either or problem. You're going to have violence because you have a state, or you're going to have violence because you don't have a state. which form of violence is going to be more extreme.
Yeah, and this the same would happen when it comes to contract law or anything else, right? That these other ideas that they've brought up, those only work as long as both parties agree to continue to play within the rules, right? As soon as one of them
That's right.
decides I'm not going to do that, there has to be some mechanism there that keeps everybody bound and honor bound to whatever agreement you had, right? And that's where
Yeah,
we have the
you keep
problem.
it keeps dishonest people honest. Everybody has to be a little afraid,
Sure.
right, of what might happen if I don't keep my word. And the first thing that happens if you don't keep your word is that people don't trust you. And that's great. People shouldn't. But what happens when you don't keep your word and you materially disadvantage others? They have to be made whole again. And that only happens if there's a justice system.
Right. Right.
So, right off the top, I think we've established with pretty solid foundation that a government is going to be required in order to protect property rights. Now, there are other rights too that I think government is well suited to protect, but at the very least, property rights. And you said up top that you have a property right in your person, which I happen to agree with completely. So murder is off the books, but if murder is off limits, what do we do with those murderers? Now we need prisons.
It just keeps
Yeah,
yeah.
right. One thing leads to another, and before you know it, now people may make an argument, and it'd be somewhat rational, that well, maybe we should just execute the murderers on the spot. Okay, we've tried that before, and it doesn't exactly work out the way we would want it to
Right.
in every instance. And I think if you're playing with people's lives, it better work out as best it can in every instance.
Well, and then the other problem you have there is if you don't have a state and the legal system working through whether or not that person is a murderer, then all you really have is mob rule, and you have the
That's right.
mob stringing up the people. So again,
And
it falls back to that same stopgap.
and it, it goes so much further than all this, right? Because you'll hear it said, and I think rightfully so, that a decent society, and shouldn't we all be looking to live in a decent society? A decent society takes care of its members who cannot take care of themselves. Not who don't want to, not who are lazy, not who don't feel like it, but who literally can't. And there are more people that fit that description than you might realize.
Yeah.
I was telling you before the show started that I myself used to work in mental institutions. I worked with people for 10 years who, in no way, shape, or form, could survive living on their own. Are they less human? Do they not deserve to keep living? Do they not deserve to be fed, clothed, and sheltered? Uh, it takes, I think, a rough kind of individual to say, oh, yeah, they don't deserve those things. You're barely human. You might not be human in my eyes if you can say those sorts of things. Now, the the answer that stops short of that is, well, there would be private charity to take care of those people. There might be, and I dare say there would be in many instances. But with human life, we kind of need a guarantee. We need somebody to backstop the entire endeavor. Now, I don't for one second think this is the appropriate role of the federal government, but I worked for the state government in Connecticut doing this, and I do think it's appropriate for a state level entity to take care of this sort of thing. And the people I worked with, for the most part, for those of you who have never seen me, I'm actually kind of big and kind of frightening. And I would walk in for my job interview and I wouldn't have to say a word. Whoever was behind the desk would look up and say, "You're hired." And they would send me to the place where The most egregious forms of behavior problems were housed. And yeah, I got the shit kicked out of me for 10 solid years, night after night after night. So the other people in the good state of Connecticut didn't have to, right? And that would have happened. People, innocent people would be dead if we didn't have the organization that we had. Do I know how many? I do not. But I could tell you with 100% certainty that there would be a trail of bodies, likely children, given how things tended to work out.
This strikes a personal tone for me, because um, a couple of things. Like, the listeners know that one of my core principles is that every human has equal and immeasurable human value.
That's
Everybody,
right.
and it doesn't matter
That's
if
right.
it's you know somebody rich, somebody poor, black, white, doesn't matter. If you have a disability, if you don't, if you have a low IQ, a high IQ, those are just characteristics that describe you. But you as a human have unique and immeasurable human value, right? And so when there are people, and there are, I've said this before, I have two special needs children. Okay, my children are severe enough that they will never be able to take care of themselves. Now, I agree with you that private charity will does a much better job to help my children than, say, the federal government, or any government that goes beyond even like the kind of the local governments, right? Because they don't see the people directly, right? But and of course you have the bureaucracy, and they squander the money, and just have human nature. But the reality is people like my children exist, and someday they're going to outlive me, and they have just as much human value as every one of the listeners out there, as you, as me, everyone, right? They have a disability, but that doesn't mean that they have less human value, right? And so the reality is they're never going to be able to take care of themselves, and we as society need to say, okay, is it then, because they can never create their own fruits of their own labor, is it then okay for them to starve in the street with their human value? Or do we as a society have a moral obligation to help those who legitimately can't help themselves? Now, obviously, I would say the best case scenario is, my family, maybe nieces, nephews, somebody down the road steps up and says, we will take on that burden. We will take care of them when you are long gone, Josh. But if I were to force them to do that, then I'm back at square one. I'm doing the exact same thing that we're talking
Mhm.
about with taxation. So the conflict here, the moral conflict is, as a society, the way I see it, we have a moral obligation to make sure that these individuals who have equal and immeasurable human value to all the rest of us don't fall through the cracks, don't fall through the private charity cracks, and are not left out on the street starving. You know,
And let me put a finer spin on it, right? I live here in Tucson, Arizona, a city that I well love. I absolutely love it here. But we have a rather severe homeless problem, which means two things. We have a mental illness problem and a drug addiction problem. There's probably other things that it means too, but at the very least, it means those two things. To the drug addicted, I say you've made a choice. You made a bad choice, but you've made a choice, and it's on you to unmake that choice. Go find help wherever you can, but it's not on us to be providing that for you. To the mentally ill who are always going to end up in this condition, I say we owe you better than this. This is not a choice that you made. This is a condition that you have. And human beings, you keep saying their worth is immeasurable. And I think that's right. If I had to pick one word, I would say equal. If I had to pick another word, I would say immeasurable.
yeah, and
Right.
and actually,
And
that's exactly what the way I worded it. It's equal and immeasurable. You know,
yeah. Yeah. And I think that's really a good way to look at it. Right. And if you can't fathom in your heart of hearts why some other members of society might need something that has to be provided by the vast majority of people in society, you might have some soul searching to do. You
Yeah.
might want to try and be a better person.
And
Now, having said all that, right, I can tell you two things in the question of what do we owe each other. First, we've already established that I think in no way is the answer zero. But I'll also go so far as to say, in no way do I think that the Marxists have a point, and the answer is 100%.
right.
All right, so that brings us to 1% and 99%. Some legitimate answer falls between those two numbers. And I'm willing to say that I think it falls much more closer to 1 than 99.
Right.
But having said that, Scandinavian countries have decided differently. Right? They're up over 50%. They they don't seem terribly unhappy compared to the other nations in the world. Okay, so maybe that's a legitimate answer. It's not one that I prefer. And I can tell you that in the United States, the federal government, no matter what shit the federal government pulls, Josh, no matter how they construct a tax code to favor this group or that, to make taxes really high on the rich, to make taxes really low on the rich, the federal government collects 18% plus or minus 1% every year. And this goes back to the Eisenhower era. This is just the correct answer. We pay 18%. That's what we pay. Now, I can tell you another thing. 60% of the American population doesn't pay income tax at all when you factor in transfers. So if you're getting an earned income tax credit or Social Security, you're not paying taxes. You're gobbling up taxes. So on the one hand, the federal government collects 18% of GDP. And on the other hand, 60% of everybody doesn't pay a goddamn thing at all. Well, all right, we're not in crazy town here. When I look to Europe and I see how perfectly reasonable people live. Now, I've not been to Scandinavia, but I've been all over continental Europe. I've been to the UK. They all pay more than we do, and they don't have miserable lives. Right. So whatever it is, it's not too much from their perspective. As you know, I lived in the Middle East. That's a bit of a train wreck. They do have miserable lives there. But I lived in a socialist republic. Boy, I hesitate even to use that word. Um, so look, I don't know. Justice seems to require the answer be somewhere between 1 and 99%.
Yeah. Well, and I
And
think
I
we
think I think where you end up between 1 and 99% is a matter of personal preference.
and I mean, obviously, every one of the listeners, unless we've gained some socialist listeners
That's right.
that I don't know about, every one of the listeners, and you and I, the anarchists out there, even the constitutional conservatives, we all agree that we're doing way too much right now. We're paying for
Yeah,
too much, and we could
way too
certainly
much.
like we can scale so much further down. We don't even have to worry about what is the right answer, because we can move in the right direction for a long, long time and not hit that thing.
Well,
We're
personally,
way beyond what we're supposed to do.
I would love to get to the 1790 to 1910 answer of somewhere between 2.5 and 4%.
Right, right.
That
But
seems perfectly reasonable to me. Let's do that.
but you know what? This moral conflict is what made it so intriguing to me, and why I really wanted to have you on. Because on the one hand, morally speaking, no one has a claim on the fruits of your labor, right? If you have self ownership, then that tells you that no one can have a claim on the fruits of your labor. On the other hand,
Right.
the obligation to those who cannot produce for themselves, and they exist, if they have equal and immeasurable human value, as we believe they do, then there is a moral obligation for the rest of us to help them. Now, we brought up doing it voluntarily, right? And I would say that voluntarily we could get a long way, but again, there has to be that stopgap. There has to be that measure there where voluntary ends, right? And so that's this moral conflict is what was so intriguing to me and so uncomfortable for me when I listened to you guys discuss this episode. Now, I do want to push back a little bit on something because this is something you guys didn't discuss, but as a Christian, it's something that I think about a lot, right? And so, as a Christian, I think about the some of the core of my libertarian beliefs come from my Christian faith in the idea of free will, right? And that the only entity in the universe that I believe has a moral claim to force me to do anything, right? Who has the moral authority to lord over me is God, my creator, right? And so if there was one person that could say, Josh, you must do this, and I'm requiring you do it and forces me to do it, I would say that he has the moral authority to do so. But God gives us free will, and he doesn't force us to do any of those things, right? He respects our free will so much that he will not force us to do any of those things, even if it does mean not taking care of other people. So the next conflict to think about is if God respects our free will so much that he would not allow that kind of a violation on the individual, right? Then even for our own salvation, right? Even for our own good, he does not overstep those bounds. Then why do we believe as a society that we should be able to give government that kind of authority if God himself doesn't even give himself the kind of authority to force the compensation of our labor?
Well, I mean, not to walk down this road too far, but if you're a Christian, surely you read somewhere that Jesus saying, "Render unto Caesar what is Caesar's."
He did, but he was saying it in the context of respecting the authorities that have put us in place. He wasn't saying it in the that your money is actually Caesar's. He was saying that you respect the authorities that are placed above you, and in all of those respects, it is even like God says, I will know my followers by the fruits of their labor. He gives us instructions. He expects us to follow them, right? But he never forces us to. And that's where I kind of was looking at this again from another side of that moral conflict, right? God says you should do this, and even in my fourth principle, where I say that if you want to live in a kinder and more tolerant society, it comes from each individual choosing to sacrificially give to others, right? And that kindness and that level ripple out throughout society. It speaks right to this, but it's an individual choice, right? And again, that speaks straight back to this idea of self ownership and this idea of free will. And what free will actually is, biblically speaking, is just God giving you ownership over yourself and then giving you a guideline to follow and saying that if you want salvation, this is how you get there. You must surrender to me, you must follow my rules, all those kind of things. But he first gives you self ownership. That's where that self ownership comes from, biblically speaking, is your free will. Right? So if God respects your free will so much that he doesn't cross that line, do we have the authority and the right to then enforce government to do the same thing?
I think we actually have to. And I'm not going to go to the Bible here. I'm going to go to Thomas Hobbes. The life of man in a state of nature without government is nasty, poor, solitary, brutish, and short. I agree. That's what human nature gets you. And even if you don't agree with that, think of it this way. If we're not organized and all playing roughly by the same rules, what are we going to accomplish? Are we going to have these computers? that allow us to speak? Are we going to go to the moon in 1969? Or are we all just going to be gentlemen farmers and beekeepers? Right? Look, we have to admit that we are so imperfect, and I mean so imperfect, that we would barely survive if we couldn't organize behind a couple of principles. And that we have organized behind a couple of principles is nothing short of miraculous to me. But you've got to have some follow through. Now, I think it's so tempting to only talk about the ways in which we've gone too far, right? Because I often would start my lecture of American government. I would walk into a classroom and I would say, okay, give me one example, just one, of something that no level of government has any control over in your life right now. And, I had done this before. Obviously, I knew how I was already going to win this argument. And I'm dealing with a bunch of 18-year-olds who had no idea what was coming. So it was a little unfair. But to make a very long, painful story short, I would say, let's go through my day. I woke up this morning. My alarm clock woke me. The electricity through the alarm clock regulated. The alarm clock itself regulated. The factory from which the alarm clock was made regulated. Every worker at that factory regulated. I walked down the stairs. Do you know that stairs in the United States have to be a certain dimension? Because if they're different, people fall down all the time. So we've decided they're going to. So I walked down my regulated stairs into my regulated kitchen, where I meet my regulated wife. And so, how's your wife regulated? I said, you think I married her when she was 13? Regulated. And I went through my entire day, and literally every single thing is regulated.
Breathing your regulated air, drinking your regulated water.
No,
all
that's
of it.
right. We're breathing in the regulated air, drinking the regulated water with our low flow regulated toilets and our low flow regulated shower heads, et cetera, et cetera. And I would say, in the end, the only thing that's not completely regulated is your thought. And it's only not regulated if you keep it to yourself. Because if you beat that guy up over there because he's gay, we're going to hold your thought against you. Right? And that's where we are. Literally every second of our lives is regulated in some way. And it's so tempting to talk about that instead of what we actually owe each other. And when I talk about what we owe each other, it's really quite minimal. Right? I don't think a rich man owes his fortune to a poor man. I don't think a middle class person owes the last $10 of his disposable income to anybody but himself. I just think that there are certain instances that we can point to, and we can say that there is a social cost. Living together, it's not all puppies and rainbows, right? There's a cost. Now, if you really want to get technical about it, you make more as a result of the cooperation that's enforced upon you than you would have ever made had that enforcement never happened. So really, everybody's richer as a result, but only if you keep it below a certain line.
Yeah, I think
Right?
that's for sure right. Because obviously,
of course,
if you have chaos and you can't trust your neighbor, you can't trust to do an honored contract, right? You can't trust that contract is going to be fulfilled. Then you can't have mutual trade, mutual exchange. You can't have mutual ideas if you can't trust that your ideas are going to be respected and not stolen. There's so many different problems that come from not having that stopgap. And to go back to as you were describing that, to go back to that God scenario that I talked about. Maybe it just goes back to his commands. He commanded his followers to, help the poor, to respect the authorities that are placed above them, to honor your neighbor. All those God commands that are given. is really him just describing how to live in society. And maybe we just have to look back to that, even though he's giving us the free will. And and maybe that's how you resolve the conflict between these two moralities. You have the free will, but the guide that he gives you is telling you voluntarily do these things. And when I say voluntarily, I'm not saying voluntarily give money. I'm saying voluntarily respect the taxation laws that we are placing, because we have to take care of the least of these, right?
Yeah.
Um,
And look, is there fantastic and fabulous waste? Yes.
oh yeah,
Of course there is. Good Lord. Look at the federal bureaucracy. Tell me you couldn't cut it by half and see no difference.
right. I honestly, like I said, and I think libertarians get too far into this. We squibble over all these things, and the reality is, and I want to say maybe it was Jason Stapleton said this on his show, that we could work our entire lives and cut every possible thing that we could get our hands on our entire lives, and we still wouldn't be halfway back to where we should be with our government the way it is right now. We
Yeah,
are
no,
so
not a
beyond.
chance. Not a
Um,
chance.
yeah,
And think of it this way, right? We've got mandatory spending on the part of Congress, which includes Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. Mandatory spending, it will happen.
yep.
We don't every year sit down and debate the merits. It just will happen.
And we can't even cover that with
And
our current taxes.
it's coming to the point where the entire budget will just be those three things. And I think I said this last time I was with you. People, I understand why they say it. They don't understand how ridiculous it is. Well, just cut the military. Okay, let's cut it to zero. $0 on defense. You still haven't balanced the budget.
Right. You can cut
If
everything
you
that's
could,
not mandatory. You won't balance the budget.
for God's sake, let's all get on the same page here for a minute. Anthony said something funny a couple of days ago. He said, if you think you can balance the budget, you don't understand what a zero is. which I think kind of hits it really hard, right on the head of the
That
nail.
pretty much sums it up. Yes.
It kind of does. And look, the question that we have to ask, the sensible question, the one that we never ask in seriousness, is how much do we think government can accomplish? People just say things like, well, let the government do it. Okay, hold on a second there, Sparky. How much do you think the government can really accomplish? I used to, when I did public lectures, I used to ask the people who would come and be subjected to the sound of my voice for an hour, can you tell me one thing that the government did on time and at budget? And I disallowed any military talk, right? Just on time, anything on time and at budget. And I got crickets. I got crickets for 10 years. Finally, a very, and I mean very old man stood up and said, the Hoover Dam. And I thought, how about that? 10 years in, I think I just got an answer.
Was he right?
Yeah, I think so.
All right.
I think so. Yeah, the way to go.
Yeah.
In 250 odd years, we got that one thing we can point to. So, we're probably too optimistic about what government can accomplish. And I think this goes without saying when you start talking to people. They all think that government can just do things, that there's a magic wand kind of thinking that people fall for every time they hear it. And look, I don't know how old you are, but I'm just going to guess you're about my age, and I'm almost 60. Every presidential race that I can remember, every single one, candidates told me how they were going to fix Social Security. It still isn't fixed. Now, this tells me one of two things. They were lying, or it's unfixable. Could be both, but it has to at least be one.
I'm not quite 60. I'm in my mid 40s.
Oh,
I got
the
some.
hair. You
Oh
got
yeah,
no
yeah.
hair. You got a
Got no,
white beard,
Yep,
man.
yep, for sure. Yeah, but you got them special needs kids that can add some stress. So no hair, no good gray beard. I always joke around
I,
my dad's family goes gray really early, and my mom's family went bald. So I got the best of both worlds.
best
But
of both worlds. Well, I'm sorry for the insult that
no,
I
no, that's all
inadvertently
right. That's all
passed your
right.
way.
That's all right. It's funny because we joke around. Um my wife looks like she hasn't aged in 20 years, and then I look like somebody snuck up behind me and whacked me in the head with an aging stick every 10 minutes, right? And so
I
like
understand.
we have pictures of our last trip to the Dominican a few years ago, and one of my customers asked me if he said, "Oh, I thought you and your wife were going. I didn't know you were bringing your daughter with." And I'm like, "That's my wife. We're only 2 years apart, But so
My
it
my
is
wife
what
and
it
I are
is.
5, and the first time we went out to buy her a car, the car salesman said, "Well, you go check out the car when I talk to your father." I'm like, "Nope, blown sale, blown sale." I think I was
Yeah,
33 or so at the time. I mean, you got to be kidding me.
yeah. That's what I say.
Well,
God makes people that age like fine wine and people that age like milk, and they somehow marry each other. So,
yeah,
all
that's
right.
right.
So, I want to kind of wrap this up a little bit. And you said something in your show, and I'm paraphrasing because I don't remember the exact quote, but maybe you said that one, obviously, I agree with you. We need to scale back government so much. There's so much government trying to do that it fails miserably at. We need to do, uh, you know, a 100th of what we're trying to do right now, and that's being generous. So we can scale back so much, but if anything, government has to be that kind of insurance of last resort. I think is the phrase that you used, right? Where you want to rely on charities, you want to rely on other means almost every single time, but the ones that fall through the cracks, those little things that the private sector just doesn't do, right? You can't rely on the private sector to become your court system and your judge and jury. You can't rely on the private sector to force one party to respect the private property of another party. There's just certain things that it doesn't do. Government has to be at best that necessary evil that is the insurance of last resort that allows us to flourish in a society and reach our full potential, right? And so I kind of want to just wrap it up there. It, is is there anything more that you would say that I'm missing there? Is there another side of that I'm maybe that we need to explore?
Yeah, Machiavelli said back in the 16th century that you're a crazy person if you think mercenaries can guard the homeland
Oh, that's right, the military
because
side, yeah.
they won't. You can't hire outsiders to be your military because they're only going to take the money and leave the minute their lives are on the line. So all things in that zip code fall to the state. This will make a number of libertarians, my poor daughter Fiona among them, if she let's not get into whether poor Fiona's a libertarian or not. She writes for Reason magazine and covers immigration for them.
Mm.
But defending a border, that's not an act of voluntarism. And nations have borders. And a corporate people, and notice I'm not talking about what's happening in the present administration. I'm purposely avoiding it. But a corporate people has it within their rights to decide who they will allow to enter and become one of them. Right? So, you're left with various government functions. They're typically along these lines. They're procedural, right? Things that just kind of have to happen in courthouses and in government buildings. they're almost always procedural. And that's where the vast majority of the necessary spending is going to go,
Right.
in the de minimis world that you and I would prefer. Now, in the world we live in, most of the money is going to go to Social Security, and
Right.
that's just how it is. And I with Anthony, we went to South Carolina, and we moderated the Libertarian Party presidential debate in the early part of the campaign. And we said, look, we're going to require you to stay here in the real world. We're going to ask you a bunch of questions, and pie in the sky thinking, not allowed. And we said, so what are you going to do about Social Security? And the first guy said, I'd end it on day one. I'm like, friend, you weren't listening. You weren't listening. No pie in the sky thinking, because it took us 100 years to get into this mess. And a bunch of people will starve to death if that's your answer. And he said, oh, their families will step right up. I'm like, no, they won't. Many people on Social Security have no family. And that's the real world. The real world is messy. It's disastrous. It's cold. It's heartless. And to the extent that we want to get rid of Social Security, and I bet you and I both agree that we should absolutely get rid of Social Security.
Absolutely.
Anthony and I have done the math many times. It will take over 100 years to get to the point where we can say now Social Security is irrelevant.
And that's
what it's going to take.
And that's if you can get the both parties to agree to a plan and stick to it for 100
For
years.
100 years. Right. Good luck with that.
Now, James, we agreed to no pie in the sky thinking here.
That's right. No pie in the sky thinking. I'm just telling you the reality of the situation, right? And it will be, and I've predicted this many times, it will be the death of this country. This country will splinter, it will fall apart, and it will become something else that is not called the United States of America, because the path we are on is literally unsustainable.
Well, I have hopes that we can get through it. I think that I guess my biggest hope is that our advancements in our technology and our just productivity in those advancements will come to save us. I don't know that for sure. I just like to be that optimist, and say that it might. But the path we are on right now,
$38 trillion debt.
I know.
$38 trillion.
I know.
Come on, man.
Well, I will say that regardless of any way, shape, or form, it is going to take us a very long time to get out of it, and it will take both parties actually having to agree to do it, and it will take the rest of society all deciding to live in a poorer state in order to pay for the mistakes that we have made. And I think you guys actually brought this up. It probably will, if we buckled down and worked our way out of it, it probably will look a lot more like Europe for a very, very long time, where you won't have the luxury of having two cars. You won't have the luxury of always having air conditioning and things like that. Obviously in Arizona you will, but in Wisconsin we might not, right? And so we will have to make concessions in order to dig our way out of the hole that we have decided to place ourselves in. And that's just actual reality, because the other option is not a good one, right? But this is a discussion for a different day, my friend.
Yeah, that's right. We'll talk
for a
about
long time.
We will talk about how badly you need food and bullets later.
Absolutely. All right. Well, I have one last question for you. Now, this is something that I ask everyone. And the last time you were here, I loved your answer. It's another pie in the sky that will never happen, but I loved it because you said that you would create an amendment that every year there had to be a balanced budget, and if the representatives did not have a balanced budget, they went to prison. And I absolutely love that answer. So if you had the godlike powers you had before, and you could make a second change for liberty that either moved us closer to liberty or opened people's eyes to liberty, what's another thing you would do?
This one, I want to stipulate that my previous answer is still my favorite answer, but this one kind of cuts in a couple of directions. I how to put it? I would first want everybody, especially libertarians, but everybody. Maybe not even especially. Look, I don't think libertarians are all that dangerous. I think they're generally good people. Socialists are dangerous. When they get in charge, people die. So I guess I would like for everybody, left, right, and center, to understand human nature better than they're willing to do. Look, you can do it. The data is out there. You can have a very solid understanding of human nature, but you have to work for it. It's not only to be found in your neighborhood. You got to get out of your neighborhood. It's not only to be found in your state. It's not only to be found in your country. Move around the world. I guess I would like to see everybody get a passport, especially young people who think socialism's a great idea. I would love for them to go visit some socialist countries. That'd be fantastic. Added to that, and I think this will resonate with you quite a bit, because this is something that I think I stumbled into when I was an undergraduate, and I still haven't been able to quite figure out. I would like to know why it is that almost everybody is so afraid of freedom. Freedom is messy business, right? I, people talk about ordered freedom all the time. Well, I like messy freedom. I'm a messy freedom guy, and everybody's so terrified of it. But if that's what you're saying, what you're actually saying is, I don't think I've got what it takes to be free.
I think, everyone loves the idea of freedom. I don't think everyone understands freedom. And that's a part of what we discussed in the Martin's Minute episode. But everybody loves the idea of freedom. But I think everyone is terrified of the idea of their neighbor having freedom, right? They want to be able to have freedom for themselves, but they don't want other people to be able to make choices that they don't agree with, right?
They don't like.
They think they know
right.
better, and that just falls right back to that human nature. And so, it's one of those things that is a foundational principle that we need, but that does actually cut against human nature a little bit, because we, by human nature, are herd animals. We want to control the herd. We want to be in lockstep. And when somebody doesn't do that, it's very hard to say, it's okay for you to do your own thing. And I don't have to agree with it. That is very difficult for people and their human nature. But
I don't understand why. I've never understood why.
Right.
I don't know why on earth I would care what you're up to, as long as you're not hurting anybody else. And I sure as hell can't figure out why you care what I'm up to.
Yeah. Well,
And there we are.
If everybody, like you said, if everybody understood it much better and had that grace for everyone to live free, boy, would we be in a much better society and world in general.
Grace is a word that I generally don't hear in political conversations. So nicely done.
All right. Well, why don't you remind the listeners where they can find more of your work?
Well, you could just check the Google if you want, but at James R. Harrigan on X, I'd be much obliged if you come and follow me or yell at me there. Or if you'd prefer to have a more pleasant interaction, Facebook's always an option. I'm the only bald James R. Harrigan there. Otherwise, I'm around. Come find me.
And they can follow Words and Numbers and hear more about these fun conversations with you and Ant talking about people not understanding zero.
All the things. All the things.
All right. Well, James, thank you so much for joining us and walking through this difficult topic. I can hear the hate mail starting to come already, but I think
but it's coming to you this time, so I don't care. Coming to you.
I think it's a really important conversation because again, we have these moral conflicts, the obligations that we have to each other, and yet the moral freedom of and self ownership over our own person and the fruits of our labor. And we have to have these conversations because if we don't, then all we have is this very good political theory that is not going to live out correctly in society and can't,
Yeah.
right? And so we have to have these difficult conversations. And so I'm really, really happy that you came on and that we could discuss this through. And yes, the hate mail is coming my way this time, so it'll be fun.
I always have a great time hanging out with you. So anytime you like, you know where to find me.
Perfect, perfect. All right, Liberty lovers, go online, check out more of James's work. While you're doing that, hop on over to goodmorningliberty.us and become a member of the Fed Haters Club. Leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And do me a favor. I want to have a lot more people running for office this year on the show. I want to feature them. So if you know anybody in your area, even if it's a local election, somebody that really needs the spotlight, send me an email and tell me all about what they're about, why I should have them on the show, and I will reach out to them. Or, hey, if you want to give me some feedback on this topic and tell me why I'm way off base and anything else, or talk about how, you agree with us, anything you want to talk about, you can hit me up. You can reach me at josh@goodmorningliberty.us. So send me that email. Tell me about the candidate. Give me the feedback on the episode. I would love to hear both of them. Please, please, please be good to the sponsors that take care of this show. They make it possible for us to bring on these great guests. So please, please be good to them. So if you do all that, I promise I'm going to be back next time with another exciting person that you all need to know. Until then, remember, you own your choices, each and every one. So make some good ones. I hope you all have a good night, a good day, and a good morning, Liberty.